My name is Maya Sterling, and at 29 years old, I built a tech venture capital empire worth hundreds of millions from absolutely nothing. But today, standing outside my younger sister Jasmine's wedding on Martha's Vineyard, my own parents locked me out in a thunderstorm like I was some kind of stray animal. They stood there laughing while Jasmine dumped an entire bottle of Cabernet down the front of my dress and called me worthless trash. They mocked my husband Marcus for showing up in his construction boots, calling him a laborer who didn't belong. What they didn't know was that I secretly owned this entire luxury estate. And Marcus? He's actually the billionaire founder of Apex Development, the massive real estate conglomerate that employs Jasmine's fiancé Chad. Before I tell you how Marcus fired Chad in front of 400 wedding guests and we left in our private helicopter, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever had to teach your family a painful lesson about respect. The storm clouds rolling in from the Atlantic looked mean. They matched the knot of pure dread twisting in my stomach as I walked up the crushed shell driveway of Ocean View Manor. The air was thick with humidity and the competing scents of expensive perfume and the coming rain. I gripped my clutch tighter. This was supposed to be the social event of the summer season on Martha's Vineyard. My younger sister Jasmine was marrying Chad Blackwell, the newly appointed chief financial officer of a major real estate development firm. My parents, Victoria and Raymond, had talked about absolutely nothing else for 6 straight months. I reached the ornate iron gates, where a security guard in a crisp black suit held up one hand to stop me. "Name, please," he said, looking me up and down slowly. His eyes lingered on my dress. It was a simple black sheath from my own fashion line, Sterling Collection. But to someone who didn't know better, it probably looked plain compared to the sequins and designer labels floating past me into the venue. "Maya Sterling," I said, keeping my voice steady and professional. He scanned his clipboard with a frown. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but you're not on the VIP access list. General guests need to use the side entrance near the service road." I felt heat rush to my face. "I'm the bride's sister," I insisted. There has to be some mistake. Before he could check again, I heard the sharp click of heels on the pavement behind him. My mother, Victoria, emerged from the massive white reception tent. She looked absolutely flawless in a floor-length silver gown, her hair styled to absolute perfection. She didn't smile when she saw me. Instead, her lip curled in that familiar expression of deep disappointment she reserved exclusively for her eldest daughter. "You're late, Maya," she hissed, grabbing my arm and pulling me away from the earshot of the other arriving guests. "And look at you. You look like you're attending a funeral, not a wedding." I opened my mouth to explain that my flight from Chicago had been delayed due to weather, but she cut me off with a wave of her perfectly manicured hand. "Save it. It doesn't even matter, because there's no room for you in the main tent." I stared at her, unable to process what she was saying. "What do you mean there's no room? I'm supposed to be the maid of honor." Victoria laughed. It was a short, harsh sound that cut right through me. "Oh honey, we gave that role to someone who actually fits the aesthetic Jasmine wanted. Her college roommate from Spelman is the maid of honor now. You're just a regular guest." "And barely that. Since you refused to contribute anything to the wedding fund, we had to give your seat at the family table to one of Chad's major investors. We can't afford to waste prime seating on someone who's clearly going nowhere in life, going nowhere." The words hung in the humid air between us. 5 years ago, I had dropped out of Northwestern's medical school program to start my own business. To them, that decision made me a dropout and a complete disgrace to the family name. They had absolutely no idea that my company, Sterling Ventures, had just closed a funding deal worth $75 million. I opened my mouth to defend myself, to finally tell her the truth about everything I'd built. But the look in her cold eyes stopped me completely. She didn't want the truth. She wanted me to be small, so that Jasmine could look big by comparison. "Go find yourself a seat somewhere in the overflow section," she said, pointing toward the far edge of the property. "And stay completely out of the way. We don't want you ruining any of the professional photos." My mother's grip on my arm felt like iron as she marched me away from the white silk pavilions and the scent of fresh gardenias. We walked past rows of gold chivalry chairs where the other guests were taking their seats under the protection of the massive tent. I saw cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. I saw neighbors from my childhood in Atlanta. Every single one of them looked away as we passed, pretending they couldn't see Victoria dragging her grown daughter toward the absolute edge of the estate. We kept walking. until the perfectly manicured lawn gave way to rougher grass near where the catering trucks were parked. There, sitting alone under a massive weeping willow tree, was a small round metal table. It was rusted around the legs, and unlike every other table at this venue, it had no tablecloth, no elaborate floral centerpiece, and no chairs. Just the table, sitting there in the dirt like an afterthought. Here, Victoria said, releasing my arm with an actual shove. You can sit here. I'll have the staff bring you a folding chair eventually. I looked from that rusted table to the glowing white tent about 50 yards away. Mom, this is completely outside the venue. I won't be able to see the ceremony from here. I won't even be able to hear the vows. Victoria adjusted her diamond earrings, checking her reflection in her compact mirror. That's exactly the point, Maya. Chad comes from an extremely prominent family. His parents are uncomfortable with certain elements of our background. We promised them an absolutely flawless event. Having our unemployed daughter sitting front and center doesn't exactly scream success. It screams charity case. I felt a massive lump forming in my throat. Unemployed? Is that what you're telling people? That I'm unemployed? Victoria sighed dramatically, the sound of a martyr dealing with an impossible burden. Well, we certainly can't tell them you're some kind of hustler, can we? That sounds so street, so ghetto. Just sit here and be quiet. If you get hungry, the servers will bring out the appetizers after all the VIP guests have been properly served. She stepped closer, and her perfume was cloying and sweet. And Maya, she said, her voice dropping low, don't you dare try to sneak into the main tent. Security has been specifically instructed to escort you off the property if you cause any kind of scene. I don't want you embarrassing your sister. This is Jasmine's day. Try not to make it about your failures for once in your life. She turned sharply on her designer heels and walked back toward the lights and the music, leaving me standing completely alone next to the catering dumpsters. The sky above rumbled low and threatening. A single cold drop of rain landed on my cheek. It felt like a warning. I looked at that rusted table, then back at the tent where my entire family was gathering without me. They thought they were hiding their shame from the important guests. They didn't realize they were isolating the only person who could actually save them from the storm that was coming. I stood by that rusted table for 10 long minutes, waiting for the folding chair that never came. The wind was picking up dramatically, whipping my hair across my face. Through the gaps in the hedge, I could see the bridal party lining up for photos. Then I saw her. Jasmine, my younger sister, looked exactly like a princess, in a custom Vera Wang dress that shimmered with thousands of tiny crystals. I knew that dress had cost more than my parents' annual mortgage payments on the Atlanta house. She was surrounded by 6 bridesmaids in blush pink, all of them laughing and drinking champagne from crystal flutes. When Jasmine spotted me lurking near the bushes, her smile vanished instantly. She said something to her bridesmaids, and they all turned to stare at me, snickering behind their perfectly manicured hands. Jasmine walked over slowly, her movements graceful and predatory. Well, she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. Look who actually decided to show up. I thought Mom told you to stay in the back where you belong. I just wanted to see you, I said, forcing myself to smile. You look absolutely beautiful, Jasmine. She didn't return the compliment. Instead, her eyes raked over my black dress with undisguised contempt. Is that what you're wearing? It looks like something you picked up at a clearance rack at Target. Did you even try? Actually, this is an original from Sterling Collection, I said quietly. It's a prototype from my upcoming fall line. Jasmine laughed, a sharp barking sound that made all the bridesmaids giggle. Sterling Collection? Is that what you're calling your little sewing hobby now? God, Maya, it's so embarrassing. Chad's family is wearing Dior and Chanel, and you show up wearing whatever this is. Please just stay completely out of the professional photos. I don't want people thinking we're actually related to the help. She stepped even closer, deliberately invading my personal space. As she did, she placed her satin heel directly on the toe of my shoe, grinding it into the dirt. Oops, she said, with absolutely zero remorse. Clumsy me. Maybe you should move back even further. You're crowding the walkway. I pulled my foot back, biting down hard on my tongue. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her that my little sewing hobby had just been featured in Vogue last month. I wanted to tell her that the necklace she was wearing was a cheap knockoff, while the simple diamond studs in my ears were flawless stones I'd bought myself from Tiffany's. But I said nothing. Not yet. I just looked at her, at the sister I used to carry on my back when we were kids, and I realized there was absolutely nothing left of that little girl. There was only this cruel, shallow woman who measured human worth in designer labels and social media validation. You better hurry, I said, my voice completely flat. It looks like it's about to rain. Jasmine glanced at the darkening sky and sneered. It wouldn't dare rain on my wedding day. God loves me way too much for that. Unlike some people, she turned to walk away, then stopped and looked back over her shoulder. Now get back to your little table. You're completely ruining my view. That was the exact moment my patience finally snapped. I had taken the insults about my career. I had taken the complete exclusion from the family seating chart. But being told I was unloved by God because I didn't have money was too much. I stepped forward, my heels sinking into the soft turf. You know what, Jasmine? I said, my voice rising just enough to carry over the wind. You might be wearing a $10,000 dress, but it can't hide how absolutely ugly you're acting right now. I paid for my own flight here. I cleared my entire schedule. I came here to support you. Despite everything Mom and Dad have done to me, a little gratitude wouldn't kill you. Jasmine's face twisted with rage. She signaled to a passing waiter and grabbed a full glass of red wine from his silver tray. Gratitude? She spat. You want gratitude? You should be grateful we even let you on the property. You're nothing but a stain on this family, Maya. You're a dropout who thinks she's better than everyone because she sells clothes out of a trunk. She paused, her eyes filling with pure venom. You want to talk about ugly? Look in a mirror. And with a dramatic flick of her wrist, she threw the entire contents of the glass directly at me. The dark red liquid splashed across my chest, soaking instantly into the fabric of my dress and running down my legs. It felt cold and sticky. The bridesmaids gasped loudly, but I could hear them laughing underneath the shock. Now you look like exactly what you are, Jasmine sneered. Trash. You're just trash, Maya, and trash belongs outside with the garbage. As the last drop of wine hit the ground, a massive crack of thunder shook the earth beneath our feet. The sky opened up completely. It didn't just start to rain. It absolutely poured. A torrential downpour that seemed to come from nowhere. Screams erupted throughout the garden. Guests scrambled desperately for the cover of the main tent. Jasmine shrieked, covering her elaborate hairstyle and running toward the canopy, surrounded by her protective circle of bridesmaids. Within seconds, the garden was completely empty. Everyone had found shelter, everyone except me. I stood there frozen, the rain mixing with the wine on my dress. I was soaked to the bone in seconds. The water was freezing cold. I looked toward the tent. I could see the warm glow of the crystal chandeliers inside. I could see waiters passing out fluffy towels to the guests who had gotten slightly sprinkled. But no one looked out at me. No one came to offer me an umbrella or any help. I was completely alone in the storm. Labeled as trash and treated as less than human by my own flesh and blood, I shivered violently, hugging my arms around myself to preserve what little warmth I had left. The rain was absolutely relentless, completely blurring my vision. Through the heavy downpour, I saw a figure emerge from the tent. It was my father, Raymond. For a split second, a foolish hope sparked in my chest. He was coming to get me. He was bringing an umbrella. He was going to apologize for everything Jasmine had done and lead me into the warmth. He ran toward me, holding a large black golf umbrella over his head. But as he got closer, I saw the expression on his face. It wasn't concern. It was pure fury. He stopped several feet away, keeping himself completely dry, while I stood in the absolute deluge. What did you say to her? He shouted over the thunder. Jasmine is in there sobbing. Her makeup is completely ruined because you upset her on her wedding day. Dad, she threw wine on me. I shouted back, pointing at my completely stained dress. Look at me. She called me trash. Raymond didn't even glance at my dress. I don't care what she did. It's her wedding day. You're the older sister. You're supposed to absorb it. You're supposed to make things easier, not harder. But you've always been selfish, haven't you? Always making everything about you and your problems. He reached into his pocket and pulled something out. He threw it at me. It landed in a puddle at my feet. It was a gray, greasy rag used by the catering staff to wipe down tables. Clean yourself up, he ordered coldly. Don't let Chad's family see you looking like a drowned rat. It's embarrassing enough that you're even here. Don't make it worse. He turned around and walked to the white picket fence that separated the garden from the service area. He closed the gate firmly, and I heard the distinct click of the latch locking. He turned back one final time. Stay there until the reception starts. And if I hear one more complaint about you, I'll have security throw you out onto the highway. Do you understand me? He didn't wait for an answer. He walked back into the tent, shaking his umbrella and disappearing into the warmth and light. I looked down at the dirty rag in the mud. I looked at the locked gate. The message was absolutely clear. I wasn't family. I was a problem to be contained, a mess to be hidden from view. I didn't pick up that rag. I just stood there, letting the rain wash over me, washing away the last remnants of the love I had ever held for my father. I dragged the rusted metal chair out from under the willow tree and sat down heavily. The metal was ice cold against my legs, but I was already completely numb. As the rain continued to beat down on me relentlessly, my mind drifted back 5 years to the day that changed everything. I remembered the day I told them I was leaving Northwestern's medical school program. I remembered the absolute horror on my mother's face, not because she was worried about my future, but because she could no longer brag to her book club about her daughter. The future surgeon, you're throwing your entire life away, my father had screamed at me. You'll never amount to anything without a prestigious title behind your name. They didn't listen when I tried to explain my vision. They didn't care that I'd discovered a massive gap in the market connecting minority-owned tech startups with ethical venture capital investors. To them, business was something for people who weren't smart enough for medicine or law. So I left. I moved into a studio apartment in Chicago the size of a walk-in closet. I ate instant ramen for months. I worked 18-hour days, 7 days a week. And I built Sterling Ventures from nothing but a laptop balanced on a cardboard box. They thought I was struggling because I never asked them for money. They thought I was poor because I drove a sensible Honda and wore clothes I designed myself. They didn't know about the luxury penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan. They didn't know that Forbes had named me one of the most influential venture capitalists under 30 just last month. They didn't know that the resort we were standing on, the Martha's Vineyard Ocean View Manor, was part of a real estate portfolio I had acquired earlier this year. I had let them have this venue completely for free, anonymously. I had told my management team to approve the application from the wedding of Jasmine Sterling as a silent gift, a peace offering. I wanted to see if they would treat me with basic kindness if they thought I had nothing to offer them. I had my answer. They treated me like a stray dog because they thought I had no bite. I pulled my phone out of my clutch, shielding it from the rain with my body. I had one person left. One person who knew the complete truth. One person who loved me, whether I was a doctor or a pauper. I dialed Marcus's number, my wet fingers slipping on the screen. He answered on the first ring. His voice, deep and steady, a sharp contrast to the chaos around me. Baby, tell me you're inside. Tell me you're safe. I tried to speak, but a sob escaped instead. It's bad, Marcus, I choked out. It's worse than we ever thought. Mom put me outside in the rain. Jasmine threw wine all over me and called me trash. They locked the gate, Marcus. They actually locked me out of the tent like an animal. There was a silence on the other end, so heavy it felt like the air pressure dropped. They did what? His voice was low, a dangerous rumble that I rarely heard. Suddenly, I heard a loud hissing sound in the background, followed by the sound of an engine sputtering and dying completely. Damn it, Marcus cursed violently. Baby, listen to me. The truck just overheated. The radiator is completely blown. I'm pulling over to the shoulder right now. I felt a fresh wave of panic wash over me. You're stuck? I'm alone here. No, you're not alone, he said firmly. I'm about 2 miles from the entrance gate. I'm running the rest of the way. Running? I looked at the torrential downpour. Marcus, you can't run 2 miles in this storm. It's a complete monsoon out here. I don't care if it's a Category 5 hurricane, he said. I am not leaving you there alone with those vultures. I'll be there in 20 minutes maximum. Wait, I said, realizing the full implication of his plan. Marcus, you're coming straight from the construction site, aren't you? You're wearing your work clothes. Yeah, I've got my steel-toe boots on and the high-visibility vest. I didn't have time to change after the concrete pour at the new children's hospital project. My heart sank. My family already despised him because he drove his late father's old Ford pickup truck. They thought he was a simple construction laborer. If he showed up covered in mud, sweat, and concrete dust at a black tie wedding, they would absolutely tear him apart. Chad, the groom, was the new CFO of a major real estate development firm. He was exactly the type of man who looked down on the people who actually built the buildings he managed from his corner office. "Marcus, please don't come like that," I begged. "They'll humiliate you. They'll treat you even worse than they're treating me." "Let them try," Marcus growled. "I don't care what they think about my boots, or my truck, or my clothes. I care about you. I'm coming, Maya, and God help anyone who tries to stop me from getting to my wife." The line went dead. I stared at the dark screen of my phone. My husband, the man who quietly donated millions to charity, who owned the company that employed the groom, was running through a thunderstorm to save me. He was going to walk right into the lion's den. My parents would mock his poverty. Chad would likely try to have him arrested for trespassing. They would see a dirty construction worker. They would not see the man who signed their paychecks. I wiped the rain from my eyes and sat up straighter in that rusted chair. Let them come, I thought. Let them show him exactly who they really are. Because once Marcus sees how they treat us, there will be absolutely no mercy. The storm above was loud, but the storm coming up that driveway was going to be much, much worse. The rhythmic drumming of the rain was suddenly pierced by a sound that absolutely did not belong on Martha's vineyard. It was a guttural, mechanical roar, a coughing, sputtering growl that grew louder with every passing second. Heads inside the white tent began to turn. The string quartet faltered mid-note. I looked toward the main entrance gate, my heart hammering against my ribs. Through the curtain of rain, a vehicle turned into the long gravel driveway. It wasn't a limousine. It wasn't a luxury SUV. It was a battered, rusted Ford F-150 pickup truck that looked like it had survived multiple wars. The muffler was clearly broken because the engine noise was absolutely deafening, echoing off the manicured hedges and drowning out the polite murmurs of the guests. I watched as the truck rumbled closer, its tires crunching heavily on the wet gravel. Mud was splattered across the wheel wells, and the truck bed was filled with construction tools and tarps. To the 400 guests peering out from the dry safety of the tent, this truck was an absolute eyesore, a blemish on their perfect day. But to me, it was a chariot. I knew that truck better than I knew my own car. It had belonged to Marcus's father, a man who had spent his entire life pouring concrete foundations. When his father passed away from cancer, Marcus had inherited the truck along with his incredible work ethic. He kept it running, not because he couldn't afford better, but because it reminded him of where he came from. He had a garage full of Ferraris and Bentleys back in Chicago, but he chose to drive this relic because it had heart, just like him. The truck ground to a halt right in front of the main entrance, completely blocking the path of a sleek Rolls-Royce that had just pulled up. The engine gave one last defiant backfire that sounded exactly like a gunshot before falling silent. The driver's door groaned loudly as it was shoved open. A boot hit the wet pavement. It was a heavy work boot, caked in gray mud and scuffed from years of hard use. Then came the rest of him. Marcus stepped out into the rain, standing tall against the storm. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo. He wasn't even wearing a collared shirt. He was dressed in a pair of faded Carhartt work jeans that were stained with oil and dirt. His gray t-shirt clung to his muscular chest, dark with sweat and covered in a fine layer of white cement dust. He wore a neon yellow safety vest that seemed to glow in the gloom. He looked exactly like what he was, a man who had just spent 12 hours on a construction site. A collective gasp went through the crowd. I could see my mother, Victoria, pressing a hand dramatically to her chest in absolute horror. Jasmine's mouth dropped open in shock. Chad, the groom, stared with a look of pure revulsion, as if someone had just dumped a load of garbage directly onto his wedding cake. They saw a laborer. They saw a failure. They saw a man who did not belong in their world of silk and champagne and old money connections. But as Marcus slammed the truck door shut with a heavy thud and locked eyes with me across the garden, I didn't see any of that. I saw the only real man in a sea of counterfeits. He wiped the rain from his face with one massive hand, his jaw set in a line of grim determination, and started walking toward the locked gate. He didn't look at the valet, who was frantically waving at him to move the truck. He didn't look at the security guards who were rushing forward. He only looked at me, and in that moment, the rusted truck and the dirty clothes didn't matter at all. All that mattered was that he was here. The storm had arrived. Chad strode out from the dry sanctuary of the white tent, flanked by my parents, like some kind of corporate king holding court. He held a crystal flute of expensive champagne in one hand, and with the other, he made a theatrical show of pinching his nose shut. His face was twisted in a sneer of absolute disgust as he looked down from the raised marble steps at my husband standing in the rain. "Excuse me," Chad called out, his voice dripping with condescension. "Did someone order a septic tank repair? Deliveries and maintenance workers need to go around the back, buddy. You're completely ruining the aesthetic out here." My mother, Victoria, gasped dramatically, pressing a silk handkerchief to her mouth, as if the mere sight of Marcus might somehow infect her. "Oh, God, Raymond," she whispered, loud enough for everyone around to hear. "Look at him. He's covered in filth. Get him out of here before he touches anything expensive." Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't look down at his muddy boots or his stained shirt. He didn't look at the security guards moving to intercept him. He looked straight at Chad with a gaze so intense it should have cracked the groom's composure right then and there. He stopped at the locked gate, his large hands gripping the wet iron bars. "I'm not the plumber," Marcus said. His voice was calm, deep, and carried a weight that cut through the sound of the falling rain. "And I'm not a delivery boy. I'm Maya's husband, and I'm here to get my wife." For a second, there was complete silence. The kind of silence that happens right before a bomb goes off, and then the laughter started. It began with Jasmine, a high, shrill cackle that pierced the air. Then Chad joined in, shaking his head in disbelief. Finally, my parents and the guests inside the tent erupted into a chorus of cruel mockery. It was a wave of sound that crashed over us, relentless and vicious. "You've got to be kidding me," Chad choked out, wiping a tear of mirth from his eye. "This is your husband, Maya? This ditch digger? I knew you married down, but this is absolutely pathetic. He looks like he just crawled out of a sewer." My father, Raymond, shook his head, his face red with second-hand embarrassment. "I told you not to bring him, Maya. I told you he wouldn't fit in with these people. But you never listen. You just had to drag this embarrassment to your sister's special day." The laughter grew even louder, feeding on itself. They weren't just laughing at Marcus. They were laughing at me, at my choices, at the life they thought I led. They saw a man in dirty clothes and assumed he was worthless. They saw a blue-collar worker and assumed he was beneath them. They had absolutely no idea that the man they were mocking could buy and sell every single person in that tent 10 times over. I looked at Marcus, expecting to see anger or shame, but I saw neither. He stood there like an absolute statue, unmoving and unbroken by their scorn. He waited for the laughter to die down, his eyes locked firmly on Chad, and in that look, I saw the promise of a reckoning that would silence them all forever. Chad swirled the golden liquid in his glass, his eyes gleaming with a malicious amusement that made my skin crawl. He leaned casually against the wet iron gate, looking at Marcus through the bars like he was observing an animal in a zoo. "You know, I'm actually surprised," Chad drawled, his voice smooth and loud enough for everyone to hear. "I always thought you guys were supposed to be athletically gifted or musically inclined, you know? Basketball stars, rappers." He chuckled, a low sound that vibrated with centuries of ugly history. "But here you are, playing in the mud like a common laborer. Did the mixtape not drop? Or did you just not have the vertical leap for the NBA?" It was a microaggression so sharp it could cut glass, wrapped in the veneer of a joke, but dripping with racism. He was reducing my husband, a brilliant, self-made billionaire, to a stereotype because of the color of his skin and the dirt on his clothes. I waited for my parents to step in. I waited for Raymond, who had marched in civil rights protests in his youth, to shut this man down immediately. I waited for Victoria, who always bragged about our heritage and our history, to defend her son-in-law, but they did nothing. Worse than nothing, they joined in. My father shook his head, his face twisted in a grimace of pure shame. Not shame for Chad's bigotry, but shame for Marcus's presence. "I told you, Maya," Raymond shouted over the rain, avoiding Marcus's eyes completely. "I told you that you needed to marry someone with real ambition, someone who actually fits in with successful people. Instead, you bring this spectacle to our doorstep. We're trying to elevate this family, and you keep dragging us back down to the gutter." My mother, Victoria, looked at Chad with an apologetic smile, desperate to distance herself from us. "Oh, Chad, please forgive us," she pleaded. "We had absolutely no idea he would show up looking like a vagrant. We raised Maya better than this. She just has a taste for the low life, I suppose. It's not our fault." I felt a scream building in my throat. My parents were so desperate to be accepted by this wealthy white family that they were willing to swallow their own dignity and feed us to the wolves. They looked at Chad and saw a savior, a ticket to the upper echelon of society. They looked at Marcus and saw only a reminder of the struggle they thought they had escaped. They didn't see the man who treated their daughter like absolute royalty. They didn't see the man who worked 18-hour days to build an empire from nothing. All they saw was the dirt on his jeans and the color of his skin, and to them, that meant he was nothing. Marcus finally moved. He didn't lunge at Chad. He didn't scream at my parents. He simply shifted his weight, his boots squelching in the mud, and tilted his head slightly, watching Chad with the cold calculation of a predator assessing its prey. "You think manual labor is funny?" Marcus asked, his voice low and even. "You think building things is beneath you?" Chad laughed again, but this time it was a nervous sound. "I think people should know their place," he sneered. "And your place is at the service entrance, buddy. Now run along before I have security remove you for loitering and trespassing." My mother nodded vigorously. "Yes. Go away, Marcus. You're ruining everything. Just leave us alone." Suddenly, the chaos inside the tent spilled over. A frantic wedding planner with a headset rushed up to my mother, whispering furiously and pointing at the muddy tracks on the pristine white dance floor. The storm had completely flooded the service road, and half the catering staff was stuck in a van about a mile away. Tables were piling up with dirty champagne flutes, and the guests were getting increasingly restless, waiting for the hors d'oeuvres. My mother, Victoria, looked around in absolute panic. Her eyes landed on us. A spark of opportunistic cruelty lit up her face. She walked over to the gate and unlocked it, but she didn't open it wide enough to welcome us in. She stood there blocking the path like a sentry. "Well, don't just stand there gawking," she snapped at me. "We're completely short-staffed. The service runners can't get through the mud. Since you two are already wet and filthy anyway, you might as well make yourselves useful. Come inside and start clearing the tables. If you do a good job, I'll ask the chef to save you some of the leftover shrimp cocktail before we throw it out." The insult was so casual, so breathtakingly arrogant that it took a full moment to register. She was asking her own daughter and her son-in-law to work as busboys at her other daughter's wedding. She was offering us literal garbage as payment. I saw the muscles in Marcus's jaw tighten visibly, his hands balled into tight fists at his sides. The veins in his neck bulged against the collar of his t-shirt. He took a step forward, his imposing frame towering over my mother. His eyes were dark with a fury that promised violence, not physical, but financial. He was ready to end this right now. He was ready to pull out his phone and buy the entire venue just to kick her out. "No one talks to my wife like that," he began, his voice a low rumble of thunder that rivaled the storm outside. "You think because I have dirt on my hands, I'm your servant? I'm going to show you exactly who." I reached out and grabbed his hand, squeezing it hard. His skin was rough and warm against my cold, wet palm. "Wait," I whispered. My voice was trembling, but my eyes were dry and focused. "Not yet, Marcus. Please." He looked down at me, confusion warring with his anger. "Maya, they're treating us like animals. Why would you want to help them?" "Because I want to see," I said softly, staring at my mother, who was tapping her foot impatiently. "I want to see how far they'll actually go. I want to see if there's any bottom to this well of cruelty." I paused, letting my words sink in. "If we stop them now, they'll just say we were being uncooperative. They'll play the victim. But if we do this, if we serve them while they mock us, there will be no coming back from it. Let them dig their own grave, Marcus. Please, just for 1 hour." Marcus looked at my mother, then back at me. He saw the cold resolve in my eyes. He took a deep breath, exhaling slowly through his nose. "Okay, baby," he said, his voice tight. "We do it your way. But the second this is over, I am burning this whole kingdom to the ground." "Fine," my mother barked, oblivious to the dangerous current running between us. "Grab a tray from the service cart, and try not to drip mud on the guests. You're here to work, not to socialize. Remember your place." She turned and marched back into the party, leaving the gate open just enough for the help to squeeze through. We stepped into the light, not as guests, but as ghosts haunting the feast of people who wished we didn't exist. The humiliation was immediate and visceral. Marcus and I moved through the crowded reception tent, balancing trays piled high with half-eaten shrimp cocktails and dirty napkins. The guests deliberately avoided eye contact, treating us like invisible fixtures of the venue. I saw a former classmate from high school drop her napkin on the floor right in front of me and then wait expectantly for me to pick it up. I bent down, my face burning with shame, and retrieved it. "Thank you," she murmured, without looking at me. Already turning back to her conversation about summer homes in the Caribbean, Marcus was faring no better. I watched him across the room, his broad shoulders hunched slightly as he navigated the tight spaces between tables. He was carrying a heavy bus tub filled with empty champagne bottles, his muscles straining under the neon vest. Chad, the groom, bumped into him deliberately, spilling a drop of wine on his own tuxedo. "Watch where you're going, you clumsy oaf," Chad snapped. "That tux costs more than your entire truck is worth." Marcus didn't apologize. He simply stared at Chad until the groom muttered something under his breath and hurried away. We met near the service station, dumping the waste into large plastic bins. The smell of stale alcohol and discarded food was absolutely overwhelming. Marcus wiped sweat from his forehead, leaving a streak of dirt on his brow. "You know, baby," he whispered, leaning close so only I could hear. "This reminds me of the negotiations for the merger with Apex Global. The board members treated me like an outsider too. They thought because I didn't go to Harvard, I was easy prey." I nodded, stacking dirty plates with mechanical precision. "And what did you do?" I asked, knowing the answer, but needing to hear it. "I let them talk," Marcus said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "I let them underestimate me completely. I let them think they had won. And then when the contracts were on the table, I bought 51% of their stock before lunch. They didn't even know they were working for me until the ink was completely dry." I looked at him, really looked at him under the dirt and the exhaustion. I saw the brilliant mind that had outmaneuvered Wall Street tycoons. I saw the patience of a man who built skyscrapers from the ground up, knowing that a strong foundation takes time. "Are we close to 51% yet?" I whispered back, gesturing subtly to the room full of people who mocked us. Marcus glanced at Chad, who was currently standing on a chair, raising a toast to his own brilliance. "We're at 99%, he said, his eyes gleaming dangerously. "Just waiting for the signature." A waiter rushed past us, his arms full of clean silverware. "Hey, you two," he hissed. "Stop chatting and get back out there. The mother of the bride is complaining that table 4 is a complete disaster. Move it." We grabbed our trays and headed back into the fray. As I walked past my parents' table, I heard my father, Raymond, laughing loudly at a joke Chad had made. He didn't even notice his eldest daughter clearing the empty glasses from directly under his nose. He was too busy celebrating his proximity to power, never realizing that the real power was serving him water. "Ladies and gentlemen," Chad bellowed into the microphone, his voice booming across the tent. "If I could have your attention, please." The chatter died down immediately. All eyes turned to the stage where Chad stood, chest puffed out, swirling his champagne dramatically. He looked every inch the corporate shark he aspired to be. "Today isn't just about love," he continued, flashing a charming smile at Jasmine. "It's about the future. And speaking of the future, I have some absolutely huge news." He paused for dramatic effect, letting the anticipation build throughout the room. "As of this morning, I have officially been named the new Chief Financial Officer of Apex Development Corporation." Applause erupted like a sudden storm. My parents clapped the loudest, their faces glowing with pure greed. Apex Development was the biggest real estate conglomerate on the East Coast. Being CFO meant power, prestige, and millions in stock options. Chad soaked it up, raising a hand to quiet the room. "Thank you. Thank you. It's a huge responsibility. Apex has been, let's just say, a bit soft lately. The previous leadership was too focused on diversity initiatives and community outreach programs." He made air quotes with his fingers, his tone dripping with disdain. "But that ends now. My first act as CFO will be to trim the fat. We need to get back to basics: efficiency, profit. And if that means cutting loose some of the less culturally fit elements of our workforce, then so be it." A few guests shifted uncomfortably, but most nodded along, either missing the dog whistle completely or simply not caring. I froze, a dirty plate in my hand. He was talking about firing minority workers. He was talking about gutting the very programs Marcus had built to help underprivileged communities. He was bragging about destroying livelihoods to boost a stock price. "We spend way too much money pampering laborers who should just be grateful to have a job," Chad went on, his voice rising with conviction. "I plan to automate 50% of our on-site logistics and outsource the rest. We're going to clean house. No more handouts. No more charity cases clogging up the payroll." I looked at Marcus. He was standing near the bar, holding a pitcher of water. His face was unreadable, a mask of stone. But I saw his knuckles white against the glass handle. He was listening to this man, his new employee, vow to dismantle his life's work. Chad didn't know that the soft leadership he was mocking was Marcus. He didn't know that the man he called a ditch digger 10 minutes ago was the one who signed off on executive promotions. Or rather, the one who would have signed off to apex development, Chad shouted, raising his glass high, and to a leaner, whiter brighter future. He laughed at his own slip of the tongue, a sound that grated on my nerves like sandpaper. The crowd laughed with him, a sycophantic chorus fueling his massive ego. My father leaned over to my mother and whispered loudly, finally, a son-in-law with real vision and backbone. I felt sick. They were cheering for cruelty. They were toasting to bigotry. And standing in the shadows, the architect of their destruction was watching every single move, counting every insult, and preparing to bring the entire house of cards crashing down. I watched as Marcus moved toward the head table with the pitcher of ice water in his hand, looking like a toy against his massive forearm. He approached Chad, who was currently holding court with a group of sycophantic investors. Chad didn't even look up as Marcus began to fill his empty glass. He just kept talking about profit margins and cutting overhead costs. Marcus paused, the water stream steady and clear. "Excuse me, sir," Marcus said, his voice rough like gravel. I could hear the forced deference in it, a tone he hadn't used since he was a teenager working summer jobs. "I heard something about apex development. Is it true the chairman started as a laborer? I heard he really values the guys on the ground." Chad stopped mid-sentence. He turned slowly, looking at Marcus with a mixture of amusement and irritation. He clearly couldn't believe the help was speaking to him. "You heard that, did you?" Chad chuckled, taking a sip of the water Marcus had just poured. "Well, let me tell you something about rumors, my friend. They're usually started by people who wish they were in charge." He leaned back in his chair. "Yes, the chairman has a cute little backstory about pulling himself up by his bootstraps. It plays well with the PR department and the media. But between you and me, he's history." Marcus's face remained impassive, but I saw his eyes narrow slightly. "History?" Marcus repeated carefully. "I thought he built the entire company from nothing." Chad waved a hand dismissively as if swatting away an annoying fly. "He built the foundation, sure. But he's a dinosaur now, an old, senile man who's too afraid to make the hard choices that need to be made. He's a figurehead, a mascot. He sits in his office and lets the real sharks run the water. And now that I'm CFO, I'm the shark. I'm the one who holds the real power in this company." I held my breath. Chad was digging his own grave with a shovel made of pure ego. He was calling a 32-year-old man an old dinosaur. He was calling the most ruthless negotiator in the industry a senile figurehead. He had absolutely no idea who was standing right in front of him. Marcus leaned in slightly, just an inch. "So you're saying the chairman is on his way out?" Chad grinned, showing teeth that had cost thousands of dollars to straighten. "Oh, he's not just on his way out. I'm going to kick him to the curb personally. First board meeting next week. I'm presenting a vote of no confidence. He's too soft, too focused on community centers and scholarships and feel-good nonsense. We need a killer at the helm. And once I get rid of him, Apex is going to absolutely skyrocket." Marcus nodded slowly, absorbing the information. He set the pitcher down on the table with a heavy thud. "Interesting," he said, his voice losing its servile edge completely. "Very interesting. Good luck with that vote, Chad. I have a feeling it's going to be a very memorable meeting." Chad laughed, completely missing the threat in Marcus's tone. "Thanks, buddy. Now fetch me some more ice. This is melting." Marcus turned away, and as he walked past me, I saw a ghost of a smile on his lips. It was terrifying. He had just confirmed that his new executive was plotting a coup. And he had confirmed that Chad wasn't just bigoted, but disloyal. The trap was set. And Chad had walked right into it with his eyes wide open. I was clearing the dessert plates from table 5 when I saw Jasmine gliding toward us like a shark sending blood in the water. She had changed into her second dress of the evening, a silk slip dress that left absolutely nothing to the imagination. In her hand, she held a small porcelain bowl of lobster bisque, steaming hot and vibrant orange. She wasn't looking at me though. Her eyes were fixed on Marcus, who was kneeling on the floor, wiping up a champagne spill caused by a careless guest. He was vulnerable down there, a perfect target. Jasmine didn't stumble. She didn't trip over her hem. She simply walked up behind him, tilted her wrist deliberately, and poured the thick, hot soup directly onto his left boot. The liquid splashed over the leather, soaking into the laces and splattering onto his jeans. Marcus hissed in pain as the heat penetrated the heavy material, but he didn't shout. He slowly stood up, wiping the bisque from his pant leg, his face a mask of controlled fury. "Oh, my God, I'm so clumsy," Jasmine exclaimed, her hand flying to her mouth in a performance that wouldn't fool a toddler. "I'm so sorry, Marcus. I didn't see you down there on the floor. I guess I'm just not used to looking down that low," she giggled, looking around at her bridesmaids for approval. They tittered like nervous birds, enjoying the sport. Then Jasmine's eyes dropped to his boots again, and her expression shifted from fake apology to open mockery. "But hey, those are work boots, right?" she said, her voice loud and carrying. "Steel-toe boots, aren't they supposed to be waterproof and heat-resistant? I mean, I assume they're designed to handle mud and sludge and whatever else you people step in all day. So a little lobster bisque shouldn't hurt them, right?" She paused for effect. "Unless, of course, they're just cheap knockoffs. Are they from Walmart, Marcus? Did you pick them up on the clearance rack because you couldn't afford the real thing?" The insult was so petty, so small, and yet it struck a nerve deep inside me. Those boots were not cheap. They were custom-made Red Wing boots, the kind that cost $400 and last a lifetime. They were the boots his father had bought him when he landed his first major contract 10 years ago. They were a symbol of everything he had built, everything he stood for, and Jasmine was treating them like garbage. Marcus looked at the soup staining the leather. He looked at Jasmine's smirk. He took a napkin from his back pocket and calmly wiped the worst of the mess away. "It's fine, Jasmine," he said, his voice flat. "Leather cleans up. Some stains, however, are permanent, like character." Jasmine's smile faltered for a second, her eyes narrowing dangerously. "What's that supposed to mean?" she snapped. "Are you calling me stained? I'm the bride. I'm the star of this show. You're just here because my sister couldn't find a real man, a man who wears a tuxedo, not a construction vest." She wrinkled her nose dramatically, waving her hand in front of her face as if warding off a bad smell. "Honestly, Maya, I don't know how you stand the smell. He smells like sweat and wet dog. It's absolutely nauseating." She turned back to Marcus. "You really should take him outside and hose him down before he ruins the appetite of the paying guests." "Oops, I forgot you guys aren't paying guests, are you? You're working for your supper. So maybe you should get back to scrubbing the floor where you belong." I felt my hands shaking so violently the silverware on my tray rattled. I wanted to grab the nearest wine bottle and smash it on the table. I wanted to scream at her until my voice gave out, but Marcus caught my eye across the table. He gave a microscopic shake of his head. Not yet. He was still playing the long game. He was letting her pile the insults higher and higher, building a tower of disrespect that would eventually collapse and crush her. But looking at the soup on his boots, I knew we were reaching the breaking point. The storm outside was nothing compared to the pressure building inside this tent. The speeches dragged on, but the worst was yet to come. My father, Raymond, took the microphone back from Chad. He looked out at the crowd, his face flushed with champagne and misplaced pride. Beside him, my mother, Victoria, beamed, clutching Jasmine's hand like it was a lifeline. "You know, friends," Raymond boomed, raising his glass. "Raising children is hard. Sometimes you plant two seeds in the same garden, and one grows into a beautiful rose, while the other becomes a weed." The crowd chuckled nervously. I felt a cold stone settle in my stomach. He was talking about me, right in front of my face. "But today we celebrate the rose," he continued. My mother chimed in, leaning into the microphone. "Jasmine has always been our joy, our pride. And honestly, in our hearts, she's our only true daughter." The air left my lungs. They had just publicly disowned me, but they weren't done. Raymond pulled a velvet folder from his jacket pocket. "Because she's the only one carrying this family's legacy forward, we've made a decision tonight. We're signing over the deed to the family estate in Atlanta and transferring the entirety of our savings to Jasmine and Chad. We want to ensure," Patricia's eyes flicked briefly to where I stood holding a tray of dirty dishes, "that our daughter never has to struggle. We don't want her to end up living a miserable hand-to-mouth existence, like some people who think they know better than their parents." Jasmine squealed with delight, throwing her arms around them. The guests applauded thunderously, a sound that felt like it was crushing my bones. They were cheering for my erasure. They were clapping for my financial ruin. They were giving away the house I grew up in, the house I had secretly saved from foreclosure 2 years ago without telling them. They were gifting assets they didn't even realize they had already lost. I looked at the tray in my hands, the dirty napkins, the half-eaten cake. I looked at my parents smiling down at their golden child, and suddenly the hurt vanished. It was replaced by a cold, hard clarity. They had fired the last shot. They had severed the last thread. There was no reason to hold back anymore. No reason to protect them from the truth. No reason to be the dutiful daughter waiting for scraps of affection that would never come. I set the tray down on the nearest table with a deliberate clatter. The sound was small, but to me it sounded like a gavel falling. I straightened my spine, wiping my hands on my dress. I turned to Marcus. He was watching me, his eyes dark and waiting. He saw the shift in me. He saw the moment the daughter died, and the CEO took over. I walked over to him, my heels sinking slightly into the mud, but my steps steady. I reached up and brushed a speck of dirt from his cheek. His muscles were coiled tight, ready to spring. I looked him dead in the eye and spoke the words that would end their world. "It's time, baby. Burn it all down." My mother, Victoria, was crying tears of joy as she pulled a small, ornate box from her clutch. Inside, nestled on black velvet, was a heavy iron key. It was old, slightly rusted in places, but to everyone in our family, it was iconic. It was the key to the sprawling colonial house in Atlanta where I had grown up. The house that had been in our family for 3 generations. This house, Victoria sobbed into the microphone, is more than just wood and stone. It's our history. It's where your father and I built our lives. And now it's where you and Chad will build yours. We want you to raise our grandchildren there, surrounded by love and legacy. It's the greatest gift we can give you. Jasmine gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. "Oh, my God," she shrieked. "The house? You're giving us the house? This is amazing." Chad grinned like a Cheshire cat, already calculating the property value in his head. He leaned in and kissed my mother on the cheek. "Thank you, Victoria Raymond. This is incredibly generous. We'll take excellent care of it. I promise." The crowd erupted again. People were standing up, clapping, whistling. It was the perfect moment, the passing of the torch. The ultimate act of parental love, and it was a complete lie. A total fabrication. I watched them celebrating their grand gesture, and I felt a cold calm settle over me. I knew something they didn't. I knew the secret they had been hiding for 2 years. I knew why my father had been so desperate to marry Jasmine off to a wealthy man. They were broke. They had leveraged everything they owned to maintain their lifestyle, and the house was the first casualty, but they hadn't told Jasmine that. They were gifting her a ticking time bomb. I walked toward the stage, my movements deliberate. I didn't rush. I didn't shout. I just walked up the stairs, my heels clicking on the wooden planks. The sound cut through the applause like a knife. People started to notice me. The clapping faltered, then died out completely. Jasmine turned, her smile freezing when she saw me standing there in my wine-stained dress. "What do you think you're doing?" she hissed. "Get off the stage, Maya. You've ruined enough already." I ignored her. I walked straight to the microphone stand where my father was still beaming. I reached out and took the mic from his hand. He was so surprised he didn't even resist. I tapped it once to make sure it was on. The feedback squeal made everyone wince. "Wait a minute," I said, my voice amplified and echoing across the silent garden. "Before you pop the champagne, there's something everyone needs to know." I looked at my parents. Their faces were masks of confusion and fear. I looked at the key in the velvet box. "That's a beautiful gesture, Mom, Dad. Truly touching. But there's just one small problem. You can't give away something you don't actually own." The silence was absolute. You could hear the rain dripping off the tent canvas. My father stepped forward, his face turning purple. "What are you talking about, Maya? Get down from there. You're drunk." "I'm not drunk, Dad," I said calmly. "I'm just informed. You see, everyone here thinks you're gifting Jasmine a family legacy. But the truth is, you lost that house 2 years ago. You mortgaged it to the absolute limit to pay off your gambling debts, Dad. And when you defaulted, the bank foreclosed." Gasps rippled through the crowd like a wave. My mother looked like she was going to faint. "That's a lie," she screamed. "That's a complete lie, is it?" I asked, pulling a folded document from the pocket of my dress. I held it up for everyone to see. "This is the foreclosure notice from First National Bank, dated 24 months ago. It lists the property at 1847 Peachtree Avenue in Atlanta as seized assets. You've been renting it back from the bank ever since, pretending you still owned it, pretending you were still the lords of the manor. I paused, letting that sink in. But the lease is up next month, and you have nowhere to go. That's why you're giving it to Jasmine. You're hoping Chad will pay the rent. You're trying to pawn off a foreclosed house on your favorite daughter. Chad looked at my father, his eyes wide with betrayal. Is this true, Raymond? Did you try to scam me with a foreclosed house? My father stammered, unable to form a coherent sentence. It was a temporary setback, he mumbled. We were going to buy it back with what? I asked. Your credit is ruined. You have no assets. You're completely destitute. And you just tried to trick your favorite daughter into taking on your debt. I looked at Jasmine, who was still sitting in the mud from earlier, now staring at the key in horror. Happy wedding day, Jasmine. Welcome to the real legacy of this family. Lies in bankruptcy. My father, Raymond, let out a boisterous laugh that sounded forced and brittle. He looked out at the confused crowd and spread his arms wide, trying desperately to regain control of the narrative. You have to forgive my daughter, everyone, he boomed, his voice shaking slightly. She's always had an overactive imagination. And clearly she's so jealous of her sister's success that she's resorted to fabricating legal documents. This is slander, Maya, pure slander. My mother, Victoria, chimed in, her face a mask of haughty disdain. It's sad, really. She can't stand that Jasmine is getting the fairy tale ending she never had. Darling, put that fake paper away before you embarrass yourself any further. You're making a complete fool of yourself. I watched them deny reality, standing there in their expensive clothes that were likely bought on maxed-out credit cards. They truly believed they could talk their way out of this. They thought their social standing and their arrogance were shields that could deflect the truth. But I had come prepared. I knew they would call me a liar. I knew they would try to gaslight me in front of 400 people. That's why I hadn't just brought a piece of paper. I walked over to the audiovisual cart at the side of the stage where the laptop controlling the wedding slideshow sat. The tech guy tried to block me, but one look from Marcus, who had moved to the bottom of the stairs, made him step aside immediately. I pulled the HDMI cable from the laptop and plugged it into my phone. The giant LED screen behind the stage flickered. The looping video of Jasmine and Chad frolicking on a beach disappeared. In its place, a high-resolution PDF appeared, projected 10 feet tall for everyone to see. Gasps rippled through the audience like an electric current. It wasn't a forgery. It was a bank statement from First National Bank, scanned and enlarged. The header was unmistakable. The account names were Raymond and Victoria Sterling, and the numbers were in bold red ink. I tapped my phone screen, zooming in on the transaction history. Let's look at the details, shall we? I said, my voice cutting through the stunned silence. Here we see the initial second mortgage taken out 2 years ago. $400,000. That's a lot of money. You told everyone you were investing in a new business venture. I swiped to show the wire transfers. But if we look at the transfer records right here, we see where that money actually went. The screen shifted to show dozens of transactions. MGM Grand, Caesar's Palace, the Borgata, dozens of wire transfers totaling nearly $500,000. You didn't invest in a business, Dad, I said, looking at him. You gambled it away. You spent your children's inheritance at the blackjack tables in Atlantic City and Las Vegas, and when the money ran out, you stopped paying the mortgage. I swiped to the next document. A foreclosure notice dated 30 days ago. Final judgment. Eviction scheduled for next week. The bank has already seized the title. Mom, you don't own the house. You don't own the furniture inside it. You don't even own the clothes on your back because you put them on credit cards you've defaulted on. You're standing here playing the role of benevolent benefactors, gifting a legacy to your golden child. But the only thing you're giving Jasmine is a trespassing charge if she tries to move in. My mother made a sound like a wounded animal. She looked at the screen, then at the horrified faces of her friends, and finally at Chad's parents, who looked ready to call their lawyers. The facade was gone. The ugly truth was projected in high definition, looming over them like a tombstone. They weren't wealthy socialites. They were destitute addicts who had lied to everyone they knew. And I was the only one with the receipts. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens when a bomb goes off, but the sound hasn't caught up to the shockwave yet. 400 people stared at the screen, then at my parents, and finally at me. My father was the first to break it. He started to laugh, a frantic, unhinged sound. "This is ridiculous," he sputtered. "Even if the bank took the house, it's just a temporary setback. Some faceless corporation owns it now. We can negotiate with them. We can work out a payment plan. We have connections." I shook my head slowly, pity mixing with my anger. "You really don't get it, do you, Dad? You think you can just charm your way out of this? But banks don't care about charm. They care about assets." I paused. "And when your loan went into default, when the property went to auction last month, there was only one bidder, one entity willing to take on your toxic debt." I tapped my phone one last time. The screen changed again. This time it showed a deed transfer document. The date was recent, just 2 weeks ago. The seller was First National Bank, and the buyer was highlighted in neon yellow, Sterling Ventures Capital Holdings. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some of the guests, the ones in finance or tech, recognized the name immediately. They whispered to their neighbors, pointing at me. "Sterling Ventures," Chad muttered, his face pale. "That's the venture capital firm that's been disrupting the entire market. They're absolutely massive. Why would they buy a foreclosed house in Atlanta?" "Because the CEO wanted to save her childhood home," I said, my voice ringing clear across the garden. I looked at my mother. "You called me a failure, Mom. You called me a dropout. You told everyone I was unemployed. But you never asked what I was actually doing with my time. You never asked about the late nights or the business trips. You just assumed that because I didn't follow your path, I was lost." I paused. "Well, I wasn't lost. I was building. I founded Sterling Ventures 5 years ago with nothing but a laptop and a dream. And today, that company is worth $300 million. And one of its assets is the house you're currently living in." My mother's knees gave out. She grabbed onto the podium for support, her face a mask of pure horror. "You," she whispered. "You own the house?" "Yes," I said. "I bought the debt. I paid off the arrears. I stopped the eviction. Not because you deserved it, but because I couldn't bear to see the place I grew up in sold to strangers. I saved you from homelessness, Mom. The daughter you called trash. The daughter you forced to sit in the rain. I'm the only reason you still have a roof over your head." Chad looked from the screen to me, his eyes wide with dawning realization. "Wait," he said, his voice trembling. "If you're the CEO of Sterling Ventures, then that means," he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The realization was spreading through the crowd like wildfire. The woman they had mocked, the woman they had treated like a servant, was the most powerful person in the room. And she was holding the deed to their destruction. The air was thick with tension, a physical weight pressing down on everyone. And in that silence, the sound of the rain seemed to stop, replaced by the thunderous beating of hearts, realizing they had bet on the wrong horse. Chad's face turned a shade of crimson that rivaled the wine stains on my dress. The humiliation was too much for his fragile ego to handle. He had just been exposed as a fool who was marrying into a bankrupt family, and worse, he had been outsmarted by the woman he had spent the last 3 hours mocking. He lunged across the stage, his polished shoes slipping on the wet wood. "You lying witch," he screamed, his voice cracking. "This is fake. It's all fake. You forged these documents. Security, get her out of here. Throw this trash out on the street where she belongs." He reached for the microphone, trying to wrestle it from my hand. I stepped back, but he was faster. His hand clamped around my wrist, twisting it painfully. "You're going to pay for this," he hissed, spit flying from his mouth. "I'll sue you for everything you've got. I'll ruin you." Suddenly, a shadow fell over us. A large, imposing shadow that blocked out the lights from the tent. Marcus had moved. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He simply appeared on the stage, moving with a speed that belied his massive size. He reached out and grabbed Chad's wrist, the one holding mine. His grip was like a vice. "Let go of my wife," Marcus said. His voice wasn't loud. It was a low rumble, a vibration that you felt in your chest rather than heard with your ears. It was the sound of a tectonic plate shifting. Chad tried to pull away, but he was trapped. He looked up at Marcus, his eyes wide with shock and then anger. "Get your filthy hands off me, you laborer," Chad shouted, trying to use his free hand to shove Marcus away. "Do you know who I am? I'm the CFO of Apex Development. I can buy and sell you 10 times over. I'll have you arrested for assault." Marcus didn't let go. Instead, he tightened his grip. I heard a small crunching sound, followed by a yelp of pain from Chad. Chad's knees buckled. He tried to swing at Marcus, a wild, desperate punch aimed at his jaw. Marcus caught the fist in his other hand effortlessly, like he was catching a slow-moving ball. He squeezed again. Chad cried out, dropping to his knees on the stage. "You don't know who anyone is, do you, Chad?" Marcus said, looking down at him with cold contempt. "You look, but you don't see. You see a woman in a simple dress, and you think she's poor. You see a man in work boots and you think he's weak. You're blind, and blindness is a dangerous trait for a CFO. Let him go." My mother screamed from the bottom of the steps. "You're hurting him. Someone call the police. That man is a maniac." Marcus ignored her. He leaned down, bringing his face close to Chad's. "You wanted to clean house, Chad," he whispered. "You wanted to get rid of the dead weight. Well, congratulations. You're about to get your wish. Just not the way you thought." He released Chad's hands, shoving him backward. Chad scrambled away, clutching his bruised wrists, his expensive tuxedo, now stained with mud from the stage floor. He looked up at Marcus, hate burning in his eyes. "You're dead," he panted. "You hear me? I'll make sure you never work in this town again. I'll bury you." Marcus just smiled a cold, humorless smile. "You're going to try," he said. "But I think you have a phone call to take first." Chad scrambled backward on the stage, his expensive tuxedo now smeared with mud. He looked like a cornered rat, his eyes darting between Marcus and the security guards who were hesitating at the edge of the platform. He opened his mouth to scream another threat, to demand that Marcus be thrown in jail for assault, but a shrill electronic sound cut him off. It was his phone ringing in his breast pocket. The ringtone was an obnoxious classical fanfare, the kind of sound a man chooses when he wants everyone to know he's important. Chad reached into his jacket with a shaking hand. He pulled out the sleek device and glanced at the screen. His expression shifted instantly from fear to desperate relief. He held the phone up like a shield, a smug grin returning to his bruised face. "You're done now," he spat at Marcus. "This is the executive office of Apex Development, my boss, the real power. When I tell them what you just did, you'll be lucky to get a job sweeping streets." He swiped the screen to answer and hit the speakerphone button, wanting the entire audience to hear his authority. He wanted them to hear him wielding his new power as CFO. "He wanted to crush us with it." Chad straightened his tie, trying to regain some shred of dignity. "This is Chad Blackwell," he barked into the phone, his voice trembling with adrenaline. "I'm in the middle of a serious situation here. I've been assaulted by a disgruntled laborer. I want legal on the line immediately. We're going to bury this man." There was a pause on the other end of the line. The connection was crystal clear, amplified by the silence of the stunned crowd. A woman's voice, cool and professional, floated out of the tiny speaker. "Mr. Blackwell, this is Sarah Chen, executive assistant to the chairman of the board. I'm afraid legal can't help you right now." Chad frowned, confusion clouding his eyes. "What do you mean, Sarah?" "I'm the CFO. I give the orders. Get the chairman on the line. I want to speak to him directly. I want this man destroyed. I want his name blacklisted from every construction site on the East Coast. Do you hear me?" The woman on the phone sighed a sound of infinite patience. "I cannot put the chairman on the line, Mr. Blackwell," she said. "Why not?" Chad demanded, his voice rising to a shriek. "Is he on the golf course? Is he taking a nap? Tell that old dinosaur to pick up the phone. This is an emergency." "Mr. Blackwell, you don't understand," Sarah said, her voice icy now. "I cannot put him on the phone because he's not in the office. According to his GPS tracker and the security feed I'm currently monitoring, he's at a wedding on Martha's Vineyard. In fact, he's standing right in front of you." The air left the garden. It rushed out in a single collective gasp, leaving a vacuum of pure shock. Chad froze. The phone nearly slipped from his fingers. He looked at the device, then slowly lifted his head. He looked at the empty space around him. He looked at the guests, staring with their mouths open, and then finally, his gaze landed on Marcus, who was standing 5 feet away, watching him with a face like carved granite. Marcus, who was wearing dirty work boots and a neon vest. Marcus, who had just crushed his wrist with one hand. The realization hit Chad like a physical blow. His knees buckled. He shook his head, denial warring with the terrifying truth. "No," he whispered. "No, that's impossible. He's just a laborer. He drives a beat-up truck. He's poor." Sarah's voice came through the speaker one last time, sharp as a guillotine blade. Hand the phone to Chairman Sterling, Mr. Blackwell. He wants to have a word with you about your employment status. And I suggest you listen very carefully. Marcus didn't reach for the sleek, expensive smartphone Chad was holding. Instead, he reached into the front pocket of his oil-stained jeans. He pulled out a device that looked like it had survived a war zone, a rugged, heavy-duty smartphone with a cracked screen and a thick rubber case coated in dried gray cement. The screen was illuminated, showing an active call interface, with a movement that was deliberate and agonizingly slow. Marcus pressed his thumb against the red icon on his screen. That exact second, the call on Chad's speakerphone cut out with a sharp electronic beep. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a guillotine blade hanging suspended in the air, waiting to drop. The connection was undeniable. Sarah had not just been on the line with Chad. She had been on a conference call with Marcus the entire time. She had heard everything. "You can put the phone away, Chad," Marcus said. His voice had changed. It was no longer the rough, gravelly tone of a tired construction worker. It had smoothed out, becoming cold, precise, and terrifyingly authoritative. It was the voice of a man who commanded armies. The voice of a man who moved billions of dollars with a single word. "I believe Sarah has concluded her portion of the meeting. Now it's my turn." Marcus took a step forward, his heavy boots thudding against the wooden stage. He didn't look like a laborer anymore. Despite the dirt in the vest, he looked like a king in exile reclaiming his throne. In the span of exactly 60 minutes, you have managed to violate 3 separate critical clauses of your non-disclosure agreement and 2 fundamental canons of our corporate ethics policy. He held up one callous finger. First, you publicly discuss confidential internal strategy regarding the board of directors and a potential hostile takeover before any vote was cast. You announce plans to oust the chairman to a room full of civilians. That's not just a breach of contract, Chad. That's disseminating insider information. That's a federal crime. He held up a second finger, his eyes boring into Chad's soul. Second, you openly declared an intent to violate federal equal employment opportunity laws by targeting specific demographics for termination based on race and cultural fit. You announced a plan to purge the company of the very diversity that made it strong. My legal team has been listening to the audio feed from my pocket. They've already drafted the termination paperwork for cause. He held up a third finger. And finally, you engaged in conduct unbecoming of an executive officer by physically assaulting the spouse of a majority shareholder. You grabbed my wife, you twisted her arm, and you did it while representing Apex Development. Marcus lowered his hand. I built Apex Development on a foundation of integrity. I built it with these hands. He held up his dirt-stained palms for the crowd to see. I started pouring concrete when I was 18 years old. I know every bolt, every beam, and every worker in this company. And you stand here in a rented tuxedo, drinking champagne you can't afford, and think you have the right to tear it down. He paused. You called me a dinosaur, Chad. You called me a figurehead. Well, you're about to learn a very painful lesson. Fossils are hard. And this dinosaur still has teeth. Chad looked as if he had stopped breathing. His face was no longer red with anger. It was a sickly shade of gray, like wet ash. The name hung in the air between them, heavy and suffocating. Marcus Sterling, the founder, the legend, the man whose name was on the building Chad worked in, the man whose signature was on the paychecks Chad cashed. It was impossible. It had to be a nightmare. Chad took a stumbling step back, his polished shoes skidding on the wet stage. He looked at the dirty boots again, but this time he didn't see poverty. He saw the eccentricities of a genius. He looked at the cement dust on the t-shirt and saw the hands-on leadership style the business journals always raved about. The pieces fell into place with a sickening click. No, Chad whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of the wind rattling the tent flaps. You can't be him. Marcus Sterling is a myth. He doesn't come to weddings on Martha's Vineyard dressed like this. He doesn't marry. He gestured weakly toward me, his hand trembling so violently he could barely keep it lifted. Marcus took another step forward, invading Chad's personal space with the sheer force of his presence. I am exactly who I say I am, Chad. And I am exactly where I need to be, standing next to my wife, protecting my company from a liability like you. He paused. You wanted to meet the chairman. You wanted to look him in the eye and tell him he was a dinosaur. Well, here I am. Look at me. Chad couldn't look. He dropped his gaze, staring at the floor like a scolded child. I didn't know, he stammered. "Sir, I was just joking. It was a misunderstanding. I have so much respect for your vision. I can fix this. Please, this is my wedding day." Marcus didn't blink. His expression didn't soften. "There's nothing to fix," he said flatly. "The damage is done. And as for your wedding day, consider this my gift to you, the gift of consequences." He paused. "You're fired, Chad. Effective immediately. You're stripped of your title, your stock options, and your security clearance. You will not set foot in Apex Development headquarters again, not even to collect your personal effects. Security will box them up and leave them on the curb." Chad let out a strangled sob. "You can't do that. I have a contract." "You had a contract," Marcus corrected. "A contract you breached the moment you opened your mouth on this stage. And don't worry about the legalities. My legal team is already drafting the paperwork. In fact, you can expect a process server at your door tomorrow morning. We're filing a civil suit for defamation of corporate leadership and breach of fiduciary duty. We're going to make sure that the only thing you ever manage again is a shift at a fast food drive-thru. And even then, I might just buy the franchise to fire you again." Marcus turned his back on Chad, dismissing him as if he were nothing more than a nuisance. He walked over to me, his eyes softening instantly. He reached out and took my hand, his rough palm warm and reassuring. "Are you okay, baby?" he asked, his voice gentle again. I nodded, unable to speak. I was more than okay. I was witnessing justice, pure, unadulterated justice. The silence didn't last. It broke like a fever. A murmur started in the front row where Chad's so-called VIP guests were seated. These were men and women from the real estate and finance sectors, people Chad had invited to show off his new connections. But now they weren't looking at Chad. They were staring at Marcus. I saw an older man in a charcoal suit stand up slowly. He squinted through his glasses, ignoring the rain that was drifting under the tent flap. I recognized him. He was the CEO of a major concrete supply firm, a man my parents had been fawning over all afternoon. "Oh, my God," he whispered, loud enough to be heard. "It's him. That's Marcus Sterling. I saw him at the groundbreaking ceremony for the new stadium last year. He hates suits and TIs. Always wears work clothes." The whisper turned into a roar. Phones were pulled out. People were frantically Googling, searching for images of the reclusive billionaire chairman. Screens were held up, comparing the headshot in business journals to the man standing on the stage in work boots. The resemblance was undeniable. The realization swept through the crowd like a physical force. The laughter that had filled the air 10 minutes ago was replaced by a terrified hush. The guests who had mocked Marcus, the women who had sneered at his vest, the men who had jeered at his truck, they all suddenly looked ill. They realized they had just insulted the most powerful man in their industry. The social tide turned so fast it was dizzying. People began to physically distance themselves from Chad and Jasmine. They took steps back, creating a wide circle around the stage as if failure was contagious. No one wanted to be standing next to the man who had just been publicly executed by the king. They turned their backs on the bride and groom, orienting themselves toward Marcus, their expressions shifting from mockery to a fawning sort of reverence. My parents stood frozen at the bottom of the stairs. They were the only ones who still didn't fully understand the magnitude of what was happening. They weren't in the industry. They didn't read the trade papers. They just saw their golden ticket turning into ash. My mother, Victoria, looked around wildly, her eyes darting from the guests who were now shunning her to the son-in-law she had worshipped. "Raymond," she hissed, clutching my father's arm. "What's happening? Why are they looking at him like that?" Chad said he was a nobody. My father didn't answer. He was staring at Marcus with a look of dawning horror. He saw the way the other powerful men in the room were bowing their heads. He saw the fear in Chad's eyes. He realized that the balance of power had shifted, but he couldn't comprehend how. How could the man in the mud be the king? How could the daughter he called a failure be standing next to the throne? They looked small suddenly. The arrogance that had fueled them all day evaporated, leaving them looking like two confused elderly people standing in the rain at a party that had just ended. They looked at me, searching for an explanation, for a lifeline, but I just stared back, my face impassive. They had chosen their side. Now they had to live on it. Jasmine let out a scream that sounded like glass shattering. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated denial. She looked at Chad, cowering on the floor, and then at Marcus, standing like a titan. Her brain simply refused to process the information. It rejected the new reality where she wasn't the princess and I wasn't the pauper. No, she shrieked, her face twisting into an ugly mask of rage. This is a lie. This is all a sick joke. You're lying, Maya. You hired these people. You put that fake document on the screen. And him, she pointed a shaking finger at Marcus. He's a nobody. He's a bricklayer. I saw his truck. It's a piece of junk. She stomped across the stage, her white dress now trailing in the mud that Chad had tracked up. She looked deranged, her perfect hair coming undone in the wind. You think you can fool us? She spat at Marcus. You think because you put on a deep voice and acted tough, we're going to believe you're a billionaire? You're nothing. You're the help. And I'm going to prove it. Before anyone could stop her, she lunged at Marcus. It was a feral, desperate attack. She grabbed the front of his neon safety vest and ripped it open. The Velcro tore with a loud, ripping sound that echoed through the silent tent. She clawed at his gray t-shirt, trying to tear it away as if she expected to find a custom label underneath. She wanted to expose the fraud. She wanted to reveal the cheap undershirt of a poor man. Get off me, Marcus said, his voice calm but firm. He didn't strike her. He simply caught her wrist to stop her from scratching him. But in the struggle, as she pulled and clawed, the sleeve of his t-shirt rode up his forearm, and that's when the stage lights caught it. There, strapped to his wrist, amidst the cement dust and the grime, was a watch. But it wasn't a digital sports watch. It wasn't a cheap knockoff. It was a Patek Philippe Nautilus in rose gold with a chocolate brown dial. I knew exactly how much it cost because I was with him when he bought it to celebrate the closing of the Apex acquisition. $200,000. It gleamed against his dark skin, a beacon of undeniable wealth that cut through the gloom of the storm like a laser. The guests in the front row gasped in unison. These were wealthy people. They knew watches. They knew that you couldn't fake the specific luster of that gold or the intricate movement of that second hand. They knew that a man who wore the equivalent of a luxury sports car on his wrist wasn't worried about the price of gas for his pickup truck. Jasmine stopped struggling instantly. Her eyes were glued to the watch. She stared at the intricate face, the heavy gold links that were now smeared with a little bit of mud from her own hands. Her breathing hitched in her throat. She looked from the watch up to Marcus's face. The arrogance drained out of her, leaving only a hollow terror. The reality crashed down on her with the weight of a collapsing building. It was real. The money was real. The power was real. And she had just spent the last 4 hours treating a man who could buy her entire existence like he was beneath her. She made a small whimpering sound, and her hands fell away from his chest. She stepped back, stumbling over her own train, leaving muddy handprints on Marcus's shirt, but the dirt didn't make him look poor anymore. It just made him look like a king who had momentarily stepped down into the mud to deal with a peasant. The tension in the tent was already at a breaking point. But the arrival of a breathless man in an immaculate tuxedo pushed it over the edge. It was Mr. Henderson, the general manager of the Martha's Vineyard, Oceanview Manor. Throughout the planning process, my mother had spoken of him with reverence, treating him like a minor deity because he controlled the reservation schedule. She had bragged about how difficult it was to get a booking here, how she had to pull strings just to get a meeting with him. Now that same man was sprinting across the wet lawn, his coattails flapping behind him, ignoring the puddles splashing onto his polished shoes. He didn't run toward the bride. He didn't run toward the groom or my parents. He ran straight to me. He skidded to a halt at the foot of the stairs, his face pale and glistening with sweat. He looked terrified. He bowed low, so low it was almost comical, a gesture of supreme deference that sent a fresh wave of shock through the crowd. Miss Sterling, he gasped, catching his breath. I am so incredibly sorry. I was away at the main office dealing with the storm damage. I had no idea you were on the premises. If I had known the owner of the estate was attending, I would have been here to greet you personally. The words hung in the air like smoke. Owner, my mother, Victoria, made a choking sound. Her eyes bulged. She looked at Mr. Henderson, then at me, shaking her head in a spasm of denial. What are you saying, Mr. Henderson? She stammered, her voice shrill and weak. We rented this venue. We paid the deposit. This is our wedding. Mr. Henderson stood up, straightening his jacket, and turned to look at my mother with cold, professional disdain. You paid a rental fee for the use of the grounds. Madam, he said, his tone clipped and dismissive. But the grounds themselves, along with the hotel, the golf course, and the private beach are the property of Sterling Ventures Capital. And since Miss Sterling is the sole proprietor of Sterling Ventures, that makes this her estate. You are merely guests, and from what I can see, extremely rude ones. He turned his back on her, cutting her off completely, and looked back at me. His demeanor shifted instantly back to anxious servitude. Miss Sterling, please forgive the staff. We were under the impression that this was a charity event you had authorized. We didn't realize these people would treat the property or you with such disrespect. He glanced around at the overturned chairs, the mud tracked onto the stage, and the spilled food. He looked at Chad cowering on the floor and Jasmine shivering in her ruined dress. Shall I have security clear this mess from your garden, madam? He asked. His voice was hopeful, as if he wanted nothing more than to sweep my family into the trash where he felt they belonged. I have the local police on speed dial. We can have the premises vacated in 10 minutes. Just give the word, and I'll have them removed for trespassing and disorderly conduct. I looked down at Mr. Henderson. Then I looked at the sea of faces staring up at me. My parents looked small and shriveled, their pretensions stripped away to reveal the fear underneath. Jasmine looked like a child who had broken a toy and was waiting to be punished. Chad looked like a man facing a firing squad. They were all waiting for my answer. They were waiting to see if the daughter they had cast out would show them the mercy they had never shown her. I took a deep breath, smelling the rain and the sweet scent of total victory. The power was entirely in my hands. The venue was mine. The debt was mine. Their futures were mine. And Mr. Henderson stood ready like a loyal soldier, waiting for the command to execute. I looked at Mr. Henderson, who was waiting with bated breath for my command. Then I turned my gaze slowly to my parents. They were huddled together at the foot of the stairs, shivering not from the cold, but from the terrifying realization of what they had done. You really thought you pulled this off, didn't you? I asked, my voice carrying over the sound of the wind. You thought you managed to secure the most exclusive venue on the East Coast on a wish and a prayer. You didn't even question why the $50,000 invoice was zeroed out. You just assumed the world owed it to you. I paused. The truth is, I approved that application. When my team brought me the request from the Sterling family, I told them to let you have it. I told them to waive the entire fee. $50,000, Mom. That's what I gave you today. I did it because despite everything, despite the years of neglect and the constant criticism, I still wanted to be a good sister. I wanted Jasmine to have her fairy tale. I wanted to give you one last chance to be a family. My voice hardened. I thought that maybe if I gave you this gift anonymously, without asking for credit, you might look at me with kindness just once. I wanted to believe that somewhere under all that greed, there was love. I paused, letting the words sink in. My mother was sobbing now, her hands covering her face. My father looked at the ground, unable to meet my eyes. But I was wrong, I continued. I was so foolishly wrong. I came here offering an olive branch, and you used it to beat me. Jasmine threw wine in my face because she couldn't stand to see me happy. She called me trash. And you, Dad? I looked at him until he was forced to look up. You walked out into the rain, not to bring me inside, but to throw a dirty rag at me. You told me to wipe my face so I wouldn't embarrass you. You locked the gate. You literally locked me out of the celebration I paid for. I shook my head. You sat inside eating food that I bought, drinking wine that I provided, and you laughed while I froze. You mocked my husband. You belittled his work. You tried to humiliate the very people who were keeping you afloat. My voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried across the entire garden. You took my kindness and you spat on it. Well, the rain has stopped washing away my patience. There's no more grace left in me for you. Not a single drop. I turned back to Mr. Henderson, who straightened up, ready to serve. You asked me if I wanted you to remove the mess from my garden. I said, my voice cold and final. The answer is yes. This party is over. Cut the music, turn off the lights, and get these people off my property. I want them gone, Mr. Henderson. All of them. Right now. The wedding is canceled. Chad stood up, his legs shaking violently beneath him. The silence of the room was broken by sudden aggressive buzzing from his breast pocket. It wasn't a phone call this time. It was a notification, then another, then a cascade of vibrations that felt like electric shocks against his chest. He pulled the phone out, his wet fingers slipping on the screen. He stared at the notifications stacking up on his lock screen, each one a digital hammer blow, destroying his life in real time. Notification from American Express. Corporate Platinum card ending in 4098 has been deactivated by system administrator. Transaction declined. Notification from Apex Fleet Management. Vehicle ID 772 has been remotely disabled for asset recovery. GPS location locked. Tow truck dispatched. Notification from Apex Human Resources. Your access to company servers has been revoked. Severance package denied due to gross misconduct. Pending stock options canceled. He tapped the banking app desperately, trying to log in to transfer his funds to a private account. Access denied. User account suspended pending legal review. He tried his email. Account not found. He was being erased. In the span of 2 minutes, Marcus had turned off his financial life support. He looked up toward the parking lot where his sleek company car was parked. The headlights flashed once and then went dark. The doors locked audibly. He was stranded. He had no money. He had no car. He had no job, and he was standing in the mud in a ruined tuxedo. Jasmine reached out to him, her mascara running down her cheeks in black rivulets. "Chad, baby," she sobbed, clutching at his sleeve. "Don't worry about them. We don't need the job. We have each other. We have the house. We can fix this. We can sue them. Just calm down and look at me." He slapped her hand away. The sound was sharp and shocking, echoing through the quiet tent. He looked at her with eyes full of pure, unadulterated hatred. There was no love there. There never really had been, just calculation. And now the math didn't add up. "Fix this?" he screamed, his voice cracking with hysteria. "Fix this, you stupid, deluded little girl. There's nothing to fix. It's gone. Everything is gone. My job, my stock, my reputation. My car is bricked in the parking lot, Jasmine. I can't even drive out of here." He pointed a trembling finger at her and then at my parents, who were cowering nearby like frightened children. "And do you know why? Because of you. Because of your lying, bankrupt trash family. You told me you came from old money. You told me you had connections. You lied. You're nothing but frauds, living on credit and borrowed time. You dragged me into your sewer." His voice broke. "I was a rising star. I was going to be the CEO, and now I'm nothing because I stood next to you." "But Chad," Jasmine wailed, tears streaming down her face, mixing with the rain. "I love you. We're married. This is our wedding day." "No, we're not," Chad spat. He fumbled with the ring on his finger, tearing it off his hand. He threw it into the mud with a violent splash. "I am not marrying into a family of beggars and liars. I am not going down with your sinking ship. The license isn't signed yet. As far as I'm concerned, this never happened. You want a husband? Ask the bricklayer. Maybe he's hiring." He turned and started running. He didn't run like a dignified executive. He ran like a coward. He shoved past a waiter, knocking a tray of empty glasses to the ground. He pushed past the guests, who were parting like the Red Sea to let the contagion pass. He ran out of the tent and into the pouring rain, heading toward the main road, presumably to call a taxi because his company Porsche was now just a 2-ton paperweight. I watched him go. I felt no satisfaction, only a cold confirmation. I knew he never loved her. I knew he was a parasite looking for a host. And the moment the host was revealed to be sick, he detached himself. Jasmine stood there alone in the center of the dance floor, the white dress she had prized so much, now splashed with mud. Her groom was gone. Her future had evaporated. She looked at the ring in the dirt. She looked at the empty space where Chad had been, and finally, she collapsed, folding in on herself like a broken doll. But I had one more thing to do. My parents were still standing there, and I could see the wheels turning in their heads. They were survivors. They were already calculating their next move, and right on cue, they stepped past Jasmine without even glancing at her. My mother actually lifted the hem of her gown to avoid brushing against my sister's muddy arm. They marched toward me, their faces transforming from shock to a beaming, teary-eyed pride that made my stomach turn. "Oh, Maya," my mother cried out, throwing her arms open. "My darling girl, thank goodness you're here." My father nodded vigorously. "You did it, Maya. You actually did it. Don't you see, Victoria? Our plan worked." I stared at them, unable to comprehend the sheer depth of their delusion. "What are you talking about?" "The treatment," my mother said, stepping closer. "The rain, the insults, the way we favored Jasmine. Oh honey, do you really think we're that cruel? We're your parents. We love you. But we saw the potential in you, Maya. We saw that you were special. And what does a diamond need to shine? Pressure. Massive, Crushing pressure. That's right, my father chimed in. We had to be the villains, so you could be the hero. We had to push you away so you would go out and build your empire. If we had been soft, you'd just be a doctor. But because we were hard on you, look at what you became, a billionaire. My mother reached out, trying to touch my arm. We did this for you. It was a test, Maya, and you passed with flying colors. Now we can finally be a real family again. They stood there beaming at me, waiting for me to break down and thank them. They truly believed that because I had money, I would buy their lies. I stared at them for a long moment, letting the silence stretch until it was almost painful. A test, I repeated slowly. You think you can call 29 years of neglect a test? You think starving me of affection was a strategy? I took a step closer. You didn't push me to succeed because you loved me. You pushed me away because you were ashamed of me. And now that I've surpassed your wildest expectations, you think you can claim credit for my hard work? I shook my head. Let me be very clear about the results of your little experiment. You tested my patience. You tested my sanity. You tested my ability to survive without the people who were supposed to protect me. But here's the final grade. You failed. You failed as parents. You failed as human beings. And you have lost the privilege of calling me your daughter. My mother gasped, reaching for my hand. Maya, please, don't be like this. We're your family. We're all you have. No, I said, pulling my hand away. I have a husband who would walk through fire for me. I have a career I built with my own two hands. You're just people who used to know me. I turned away from them, breaking the connection forever. Mr. Henderson, I said, pointing at my parents and then at Jasmine, who was still sobbing in the mud. Please escort these trespassers off my property. Mr. Henderson nodded sharply. With pleasure, Miss Sterling. I checked my watch. You have 10 minutes, I said over my shoulder, not looking back at them. 10 minutes to gather your personal belongings and vacate the premises. If you're still here at minute 11, I will have you arrested for criminal trespassing. But where will we go? My father cried out. We have nowhere. The house is gone. We have no money. I don't know, Dad, I said, walking back toward the warmth of my husband. Maybe you should treat it as a test. I'm sure it will build character. The low thrumming sound began as a vibration in the ground before it exploded into a roar overhead. The wind from the rotor blades whipped through the garden, flattening the grass and sending a spray of mist over the stunned guests. A sleek black helicopter descended from the gray clouds. On its side, emblazoned in matte gold, was the logo, Sterling Ventures.id, touched down on the far side of the lawn. The landing gear sinking slightly into the soft earth, Marcus put his hand on the small of my back, a warm, steady weight that anchored me. He didn't say a word. He just guided me toward the aircraft. We walked past the ruined wedding cake. We walked past the overturned tables. We walked past the people who had called us trash. We didn't hurry. We moved with the easy confidence of people who own the ground they walk on. As we neared the helicopter, the pilot opened the passenger door. The interior was lined with cream leather and warm amber lighting. I paused for 1 second, just one heartbeat, to look back. My mother took a step forward, her hand reaching out. Her mouth moved, shaping my name, but the sound was swallowed by the engine roar. Beside her, Jasmine was still sitting in the mud, staring at nothing. And my father was frantically tapping on his phone, discovering that his service had been cut off. They were stranded. They had no car. They had no home. They had no money. Marcus helped me up into the cabin. He climbed in after me, and the door slid shut with a heavy, solid thud. The sudden silence was blissful. I leaned back into the soft leather seat, and Marcus took my hand, bringing it to his lips. Are you ready to go home, Mrs. Sterling? He asked. I looked out the window as the helicopter began to lift. I saw the figures of my parents and my sister growing smaller and smaller. I felt the weight lift off my chest, a burden I had carried for 29 years. I didn't feel sad. I felt free. Yes, I said, squeezing his hand. Let's go home. The helicopter banked sharply, turning toward Chicago, and we vanished into the clouds, leaving the mud and the misery far behind us. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our penthouse apartment overlooking Lake Michigan, casting a warm golden glow over the living room. It was a stark contrast to the gray rain of that terrible day 1 year ago. On the marble coffee table lay the latest issue of Forbes magazine. The cover image was striking, Marcus and me standing side by side, looking powerful and unshakable. He was wearing a sharp navy suit, and I was in a structured crimson dress. The bold white headline read, "The New Face of Ethical Wealth," inside. The article detailed the unprecedented growth of Sterling Ventures and the revolutionary construction methods Apex Development had implemented under Marcus's fully reinstated leadership. We weren't just rich, we were respected. We were changing the industry. But the magazine was just paper. It paled in comparison to the personal triumph. Sleeping in the next room, I walked softly down the hallway, the plush carpet absorbing the sound of my footsteps. I pushed open the door to the nursery. The room was painted a soft, calming sage green, filled with the scent of lavender and fresh linen. In the center of the room was a custom walnut crib. I leaned over the railing, my heart swelling with a love so fierce it almost brought me to my knees. Sleeping soundly on his back was our son, Jordan. We named him Jordan because from the moment he arrived, he became the center of our world like the river, constant and life-giving. He had Marcus's eyes and my nose. He let out a soft sigh in his sleep, his tiny hand curling around the edge of his blanket. I reached down and brushed a finger against his velvet soft cheek. I made a promise to him every single day. You will never know conditional love. You will never have to earn your place in this family. You will never be locked out in the cold. You are our priority simply because you exist. Marcus appeared in the doorway, his presence warm and grounding. He walked over and wrapped his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder as we both looked down at our son. He's perfect, Marcus whispered. He's everything, I said, leaning back into him.